Yep. Go ahead.
All right. Cool. Here we go. There we go. Perfect. All right. Try to stay there. Welcome. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here. My name is Rucker. I am a campus chaplain at Simpson College in Indianola, Iowa. And Lorraine and Kristen initially reached out to me to just come learn with you this morning. So, a few things before we get started. Maybe the first thing, I'd love to start with a prayer. I wonder if somebody would be willing to pray for just this conversation and our time together. Thank you. There you go.
I'd like to pray, Andy. Yeah.
All right, let's pray.
Let us invite God to be with us. Good morning, Lord. Thank you for a beautiful day. Thank you for each person who is here this morning. Thank you that Eric took time out of his busy schedule to come and help us to learn more about how we can reach kids for you, God. Help us to learn today. Help us to be open and to grow. And looks like we might be a little bit of an inner child today. It's awesome. So thank you for this time together. Help us to open our hearts and our minds and our spirit to you, God, so that your will be done and we will bring honor and glory to you, Lord. And please send your spirit with us as we learn. In your son's name. Amen.
And there's going to be some conversation, and I'll try to pass the mic just to make sure you might not think you need a mic, but let's just use it so everyone can hear it also, especially because this will be recorded. I want everybody's voices to be noted in our conversation. A few starting points for you. You notice that you have a pipe cleaner, or as they call them now, Buzzy something. Thank you. So that's just a little fidget for you. People of all ages learn differently, but I think it's also a nice little first lesson in everything that we do at Simpson. I just provide these, right? Because people learn in different ways, and some people doodle, some people need fidgets, some people take notes, right? So you're welcome to utilize that. And then similarly, just invite you to learn in whatever ways are helpful for you that aren't disruptive for the rest of the group. So if you need to get stand up, and stretch a little bit while we're in our conversation, if you need to go to the bathroom, if you need to, again, take notes, please do whatever you want to do to learn in the way that's going to be most helpful for you. I put a loose schedule up here. We'll see. It might get completely out of control, and we can just tear that up. But my thoughts for the day are the first hour doing a session just talking about sort of what is what I'm calling new context for youth ministry, what's been changing, what's been happening, and try to lay the groundwork for what we're learning and what you're learning. Try to take a break around 10:20, 10:30. And then for a second hour, focus more specifically on mental health issues with young people and the church. Take another break, and then the last maybe 30 minutes, do some reflection, debrief, and maybe a practice together. So that's my general plan. We'll see how it goes. A little bit about me before we start that first piece. Again, my name is Rucker. I grew up in Kansas City, Missouri. I grew up in a Disciples of Christ church.
Our disciples.
Yeah, let's go. So I grew up in the Disciples of Christ church. That was, as I get older, I'm more and more grateful for that. I think I appreciate that formation and see the ways it made me who I am. I also was a really inquisitive kid, and the kind of kid who was the confirmation agitator and pushed, and I just had a lot of questions, And I love the people in my church, but I think a lot of them didn't know what to do with that. Didn't know what to do with my questions. And so I think both of those pieces, growing up in the church and also being a kid who was like the agitator, those both shaped my vocational direction, right? So I went to college at City Religion, college here in Kansas City, and then I lived in Atlanta for 5 years where I went to Camden School of Theology. So, hey, oh my gosh, we're connected. particular. That's where I got more involved in high school and college ministry through actually a Lilly-funded program called the Youth Theological Initiative. So I worked in the summers there and absolutely loved it. I felt like, oh my gosh, this is what I needed when I was in high school. Larger groups of young people asking questions together. 8 years ago, Simpson College got a similar grant from the Lilly Endowment to start a similar program, sort of a daughter program, and I was hired for that position. So came from Atlanta here with my now wife. My wife grew up in Mason City, actually. She's a Simpson grad, and we both went to the seminary. That's where we met. So I've been at Simpson College for 8 years. My colleague Mara Bailey and I are both full-time chaplains there. She does more work with college students, and I kind of assist her. I do more of the high school work in the community, and she assists me. But I'm the director of the Simpson Youth Academy, which is sort of like a nonprofit housed in the college. And I'll say more about the Youth Academy later, but very briefly, a lot of what you're going to be getting today is just reflection and learning from working with high school students for the last 8 years throughout this state and throughout the conference. We bring students to live residentially and learn during the summers, and then travel throughout the year with retreats and other opportunities for formation. So I would plug that later in this morning. I'm ordained in the Episcopal Church. My colleague Mara is ordained in the Methodist Church, so we're an ecumenical team. I run with so many Methodists, I feel like I'm one of you, you know. We don't come from that Anglican Wesleyan country, but very appreciative of Methodism and like deeply ingrained in it, especially through SYA. But I work very part-time at a Episcopal church in Des Moines as well, with the free time I don't have. Yeah. So I'm full-time at Simpson, a little bit of part-time at a local church, just to keep my toe in the water. My wife and I are foster parents on and off over the last 6 years, and we have one biological son who is 2.5. So that's a little bit just about me, where I'm coming from, and I'm sure you'll learn more about me as we go along. Okay. I want to start with, I wonder if somebody would be willing to scribe for us, maybe on the front row. Kristen, we've got so much in common. We should just come up here and we'll just keep working together. I would love for you to think, I'm going to give you 30 seconds to think, what is one question you're bringing to this space about, my kind of wheelhouse is middle school and high school. Maybe in college, but middle school and high school age people and their families. What's one thing that is a burning question for you? So take 30 seconds to think about that. That could be challenges, that could be gifts, that could be something you're seeing happening that you don't understand, right? So think 30 seconds about that.
Oh my gosh.
There you go. Okay, I'm going to just have us pass the mic around. You're all welcome to say pass if you want, but if you can kind of even just notes, just little bullet points, thank you so much.
I want to know, the same goes for my whole church. How can I get teenagers on fire for Jesus?
Okay.
Mine's a little less specific, but what am I not thinking about? What am I missing? What am I not thinking about when I put together the stuff that I do?
And maybe, sorry, I should have said this. Could you tell me what your congregation is and what your role is? I don't know, is this all clear? No, okay. If you could just give me a quick, this is my church, this is my role.
Yeah, done.
Okay. I'm Pastor Leila Lackman. I'm the pastor at Belmont, and I'm a Simpson grad.
Thank you.
And Amber Hill, I'm the youth leader at Belmont.
I'm Pastor Jenny, and I'm the pastor at Canala in Laverne. And I guess my question is, how do we get started? Because we've got kids, but we haven't done anything because our numbers are so small.
I'm Brittany Abels. I'm from the Canala Church. I'm the staff parish head. We don't have kids going to church right now. And how do we get them through the door? How do we get them
Hall. I'm ordained ELCA, serving in UMC Church in Pruitt, as well as St. John in Pruitt. We don't have any kids in our families. Well, we couple, but they have allergies, so they can't come in. Yeah, reaching out to the community. I guess this is a new context for me. I've been here 2 years, so every other place I've been, I've had, huge numbers of youth. Yeah.
What was the question? Sorry.
Well, I think I'm just trying to figure out how to reach out in a community where there are so few kids, and this is new for me.
Try to stay in the camera. Come on.
I gotta keep my word.
All right.
I'm Wendy Johannesson, and I'm a pastor at Swellville, Sheffield, and West Fork. And one of the churches has a really good summer program, but then there's nothing any other time. And I will keep it momentum going.
Ongoing community for people, yeah. Thank you.
I'm not going to introduce myself, they don't know what
Okay. So are you connected with particular local churches as well?
he is now.
Okay.
He knows now.
Jody Applegate.
What?
We can put it, I'll probably move it
That's
over.
okay,
to the
I'm
wall.
Jody Applegate, I'm the lay leader in Clear Lake. And how do we compete with outside things, sports, and everything else that everybody thinks is more important than going to church?
Sure.
Even
Mary Jane Crail, I'm a musician at Clear Lake United Methodist.
more than a musician.
But, you know, as a grandmother of twin 19-year-old boys who just started college, and I accompany in the public schools for music things. I hear a lot of kids having a lot of emotional and mental concerns. And when we hopefully do get everybody to come back into church, how will we help that?
I'm Deborah Gill. I'm like this starting at Methodist Church. I'm teaching a Sunday school class this year. How do you get, I mean, these are all good questions, so I'm trying to think of a different question. How do you get kids to continue to come to church after they're confirmed?
Is it okay if I put how to keep connection?
Yeah.
Jane Sheets from Garner, and I'm on the Education Committee, and I would just say all of the above.
And I'm Deb Devine, and I'm pastor at Coney, Goodell, and Thornton churches, and you guys have just asked all the questions I probably had, and my congregation has.
Great.
I'm Kristen Peters, I'm the pastor at Garner United Methodist Church, and I am interested on the spiritual development of our little humans from
the time that they're born through adult life.
Thank you so much. Yeah, if you want to just put it to the left of the schedule.
Sure can.
We're going to just kind of keep those in our minds. Got a great range of questions there. And something I want to say before we dive into some of the material I'm going to share is, I hope that anytime you hear someone speak, that you're taking it with a grain of salt. But I want to especially encourage you to consider these as hypotheses, because my sense is that, I'm not sure, but one of the hypotheses is that we're in a time of significant cultural change. I won't go into the many reasons for that. COVID, communication, that there's so many things changing in ways that maybe haven't ever happened or haven't happened for like 100 years. And so I'm gonna give you my best guesses, right? And the best guesses of other people that I trust. But we're co-learning, and so anything that you see that's different, we need to know, right? So we're learning together, and I really feel like we're on the edge of the map, and together we're going to try to talk about how do we start to build out the edges of this map to understand what is happening. So that's kind of my caveat for this whole conversation is, I don't know. I have a few ideas. We have some theories, and I think our call to faithfulness is to do the best that we can, right? To listen well, to listen deeply to young people and families, and try to respond as faithfully as possible. And we're going to move forward together, right? So just know that this is all working theory for me, and hopefully we can keep building those theories this morning. I put a bunch of sources up here. I'd also be happy to email you this PowerPoint, but what I'm going to be sharing comes from a mix of folks who are writing and publishing for a living around youth ministry stuff in the local church. Several that I really like, but one at the top is called The End of Youth Ministry, by Andy Root. He's from Luther Seminary in Minneapolis. The Springtide Institute, springtideresearch.org, is really helpful. It's kind of like Pew Research, except for they just research about teens and spirituality. So you can go, there's lots of great stuff, like interviews, podcasts, etc. I really have been wrestling with this book called The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. It has a ton of fascinating theories. I would invite you to kind of engage with that. And then there's a documentary called The Social Dilemma on Netflix that I found really helpful too, that's about social media companies and how they work. Edit, design materials, platforms. I put a couple of those resources over there if you just want to find stuff happen during breaks. But these are a few ideas. And then at the Youth Academy, I've been there 8 years, so we've run 7 cohorts of young people, and there have been about 200 teens come through that program. So a lot of this is just my anecdotal reflection, right, on interacting with teens and their families. So a combination of personal experience and resources, that's where this is coming from. So for this kind of first piece, I'm thinking I have 3 goals. One is to describe what is happening with teens and their families in Iowa. So just sort of diagnosis. Second is to say, okay, if we at least consider this diagnosis to be accurate, what does Christianity have to offer in response to what teens are going through? And then third, more particularly, what are we called to do in this room when we go into our local churches and communities? What are we called to do? Feel free to raise your hand or jump in anytime if something doesn't make sense or you want to add something or whatever. Okay, I want to start by comparing and contrasting sort of 1950s to 1990s, what primarily middle-class culture around families was like, the trends, and then hold that up against what's been happening the last 25 years-ish. Again, these are broad brushstrokes, but some of this is, again, from sociologists or some of the books that I put up on those sources. So, some things that were happening, at least in middle-class parenting during that time. my understanding is one of the major trends in kind of how to define good parenting was about giving your children space. So especially when you think about kind of the 70s into 1980s, it was pretty normal for young people to be running around the neighborhood together without adult supervision, right? Whether because parents were working or because they just understood parenting as having a pretty long leash, right, for their children. And so part of the statistical outcomes of that type of parenting were challenges of young people, quote, growing up too fast, right? So we look at statistics of teen pregnancy, drug use, drunk driving for teens during that time. They were a lot higher than they are now. And part of that might have been because young people were running around less supervised for more of the time. So youth group was actually a concept that hasn't been around since Jesus' time. Youth group has really only been around in its current form since like the 1950s-ish. And a theory is that the mainline church responded to young people growing up too fast by creating a youth group, right? So they saw young people maybe getting into trouble, pushing the limits of experimentation in ways that were helpful for them, and they created these kind of side communities adjacent to the church that say, these are places where teens can come, they can be under adult supervision, they can connect in safer ways with their peers, and of course, like, hopefully, they can learn about the gospel, right, and be discipled. That happens more or less in different settings. But the idea is that youth group was created as a response to a specific set of problems, which was young people growing up too fast. Does that make sense? Another thing that I think probably could be said for that time period is young people imagined fewer vocational options. You know, it was more normal that they saw their parents staying at the same company for their whole lives and retiring there. It was more normal to think, I'm going to not go to college or go to community college or go in state, and I'm expecting to come back to the place that I grew up, if I didn't already stay there. So there was a sense of, not in a necessarily bad way, just a more limited range of things that you imagined for your life when you were a teen. You got a story about what was possible, and that story was a little bit more limited. We can argue about whether that's good or bad or both, but that's a little bit different than teens today. And then another really important piece is there's a philosopher named Charles Taylor who has a lot of very complicated ideas I don't completely understand, but one that I think I do, is he talks about these different, like over hundreds of years, these different kind of ages or epochs of how people are making meaning, especially in America. And he says that through a lot of American history, the age of association is a phrase that would describe how people make meaning. And by that he means people believe my identity comes from the institutions with which I'm associated. So you think about 1950s, 60s, 70s, being a member of First United Methodist Church was really important. Being a member of the Girl Scouts, being a member of the Boy Scouts, being a member of PTA. People did that because they cared, but also there was a social standing piece of that, right? My identity is related to giving myself and my gifts and my resources to this particular institution by associating with it. That's the part of my identity. Again, not all good or bad, just a descriptor. So these are a couple of marks of maybe the stories that were shaping families and teenagers 50 years ago. Just a couple of visuals to drive that home. You think about the movies, right, of the 80s. They were this youth growing up too fast kind of thing, right? E.T., The Goonies, The Breakfast Club, 16 Candles. It's all about kids acting like adults and running around, and the parents aren't even in the movies until the last 5 minutes, right?
Stand by me.
What?
Stand by me.
Stand by Me, Sandra. That's a little later, but so you,
Like it shows.
yeah. So you get that culture is reflecting an understanding of children and teens as kind of out on their own, and then consequently sometimes growing up too fast. And then age of association, I put a field of green snapshot up there. If you were in the church, or if you're a leader of the church during that time, people were self-motivated, right? It was more about how do we have the programming ready because we know people are going to come, and success was about being ready when they were going to get here, which is pretty different from now. But that was the age of association. We know people are internally motivated to be in the church building 15, 16 years ago, right? So we're going to contrast that to the last 25-ish years. One sort of theory is that there's been this kind of pendulum swing and correction or overcorrection. And so now good parenting for the kids who were raised during that Breakfast Club time, now that they're parents, is that your responsibility as a parent is to keep your child safe. That means physically and emotionally, not to be around anything that's too threatening. And the huge burden of you're responsible for helping them kind of find the meaning of their life. They have to find their thing, and it's your job to help them find their thing through a huge array of extracurricular activity, right? So, I find this fascinating. Like, why is this happening? Like, why this major shift? And again, broad brushstrokes, but some things I've read that I think are interesting. Over the last 30 years, 24-hour news has become a thing. And so a lot of parents kind of came up at a time where they're constantly bombarded by stories, and the more sensational, the more attention they're going to get, right? So 24-hour news created the sense that the world is a dangerous place because there's always a news story about kidnapping or sexual violence or, like there's always something bad happening. School shootings, where yes, we're going to get there. And so part of what that did was shift the culture to like all adults are suspect unless proven otherwise. You don't have to say all good or bad, but the rate of kidnapping and the rate of crime isn't a lot higher today than it was in the 1980s, but there's just a sense in which adults are less trustworthy. So one reason for that could be kind of the 24-hour news. That's led to a breakdown of geographic trust. Right? It used to be pretty normal to say, I'm going to send my kid outside, and I know the other parents on my block, and we all sort of parent together as a village. That rarely happens anymore, right? And it's to send your child outside and say they can walk to school under a certain age now, you want to get the police called on you, right? The expectations of what a child can handle have changed, and that's partially changed because there's been a breakdown in the geographic trust with adults and communities. Another thing that's happened is an increased competition applying for colleges and the job market. It's understandable that young people would start to almost think of their children as like, this is a race car or something. Like this is something I'm honing and preparing to go out there in the battleground against all these other young people. So I need them to start building a resume when they're 11 years old, right? There's just a sense of heightened preparation that's needed, that's put on parents. I talked about the shift of the perception that adults aren't trustworthy. Some of that is statistically backed up, but I also want to be, I'm sympathetic to that, right? I'm sympathetic to the ways that parents are concerned because you just think about the huge abuse scandals that have been uncovered in the last 20 years. Many should be Catholic Church is one example, but it's like, yeah, these institutions have been not only allowing children to be abused, but intentionally hiding them, right? So there's these evidences that we are seeing that's like, maybe adults should be assumed untrustworthy, right? So there's these scandals that we found out about. These parents came up in the school shooting generation, right? And are thinking about that every day. Another one just happened 3 days ago, right? We all know about COVID, of course, and I feel like that's something that shifted many parents. If there was already a sense of like needing to protect a child, then shifting that to overdrive, right? And keeping your child home for 2 years, and that vigilance. How do you move out of that after that's been your job for 2 years, is to stop your child from having any contact with the outside world, right? Yes?
I think COVID also changed.
Let's use the mic.
Oh, just a remark. I believe COVID also changed kids. And I think we're gradually working our way back to the way the kids used to respond, but it changed their work ethic.
Yes, I agree. So we're going to get more into what it did to children. So it changed children and it changed families and parents. So, whereas before the danger in the 60s, 70s, 80s was kids had too much freedom and therefore growing up too fast, the converse danger is what some writers call the slowdown, which I really like that summary. The slowdown means parents subconsciously feeling, I have to slow down my kid from growing up for longer, like an elongated childhood and a delayed adulthood. And I've experienced this, I work at a college, and I've experienced this even for 21, 22, 23-year-olds with parents calling us, the college, as if it's our responsibility, right, to take care of some of their children who, as if they were 12, right? So they instead of growing up too fast, now they're sort of maybe growing up too slow, right? And again, yes?
My kids are in college and there's a Facebook group.
Lisa, can you use the mic?
My kids are in college and there's a Facebook group for parents, and I'm amused by some of the questions and concerns that some of the parents post on Facebook. So, yeah, it's very true.
Just in terms of the over-management.
Yes, yeah, hard to let go, still managing things that kids should be taken care of now that they're in college themselves.
Yeah.
Isn't that another thing that's been changed too, is access to social media? Because, like, I remember being in college, and that's when Facebook, MySpace just started to come out. Now there's elementary kids who are getting on Facebook and getting on Snapchat, TikTok, and that's changing the whole world too, and their access to the outside world and all different things too.
Yes, thank you for both of those. And we're gonna do, this is a great foreshadowing, we're gonna get to that, definitely.
And I don't have school-age children yet. I mean, my daughter's in preschool, she's 3, but my little guy is 11 months old. But I, like when you're talking about the need to slow down, I don't know if it's just a stage of life I'm in, but like when your baby hair starts to go away, I'm like, I panic. My little guy is about to be a year old, and he's starting to walk. I'm like, oh, I need another newborn. I mean, I don't think I do, but so I don't know if that'll change as I get older, but I feel that, and my littles are real little.
Absolutely, and I think I'll inject this topic with this kind of note asterisk throughout. I always want to be careful, and I don't know who you're doing, but I always want to be careful. It's really easy, I think, as we move age generationally to just make blanket rejections of generations to be like, oh, all these kids are immature, why don't they grow up, right? Instead of trying to say, here's some trends, how can I remain curious about what's happening and sympathetic while understanding the data, right? And so I want to say, a lot of these are descriptors, they're not judgments about a kid in the 1980s was better or worse than a kid now, right? They were just different contexts that were shaping these students, right? So, thinking about this, I think helps us to look in a new way at youth group. Because youth group was a contextual response to children and families in 1960. And the world is completely different now, right? Youth group was a response when young people didn't have enough to do and were taking too many risks. And now we're in a situation where there's really the converse problem, and we're still offering the exact same proposed solution, right? So we're going to unpack what that means. As opposed to age of identity or age of association time, where young people way back when had a more limited, maybe imagination about possibilities, that's totally opened up, right? So you have to compete in college, to apply for college, you have to compete in the job market, and there is a narrative that's like, you can do anything you want, right? Which in some ways is really beautiful, but in many ways can be a curse. You know, I find that, many young people find that quite paralyzing, like the infinite amount of hypothetical options. And I don't know if that's actually a Christian narrative. You know, the goal is for us to have complete freedom to do whatever we want, unbounded by responsibility to community, right? So it's good to dig into, like, do we really want kids to believe you can do anything you want? Or is it more complex than that? And the pressure is to find yourself. Right? You have to find yourself. And that transitions us to this really important concept of the age of authenticity. That Charles Taylor says we're in the middle of a move from age of association to what's called the age of authenticity, where my identity comes not from association with an institution, but from my individual personal journey, who I am, and finding myself, right? So a couple little goodies for us to contrast. I don't know if anybody knows the Gilmore Girls. Yeah. So Gilmore Girls showed probably was like 10, 15 years ago it came out.
Yeah, we're like 20 years.
Okay, all right. Okay, so
First started.
this is I think emblematic or an example of the shift to age of identity and the parenting narrative. So they're best friends. Mom and daughter are best friends, and she goes to bat for her, and they know everything about each other. And she's like all up in her life, right? And that's really different from the Breakfast Club, right? And I think that's an example of one of maybe the expectation shifts in parenting. Not all good or bad, but different, right? I've been really helped by this phrase, snowplow parenting. A snowplow goes ahead and clears every obstacle out of the road. Snowplow parents go ahead of their children and clear out every obstacle in front of their child, right? And again, there's nuance here because, gosh, of course we need to protect our children, right? We need to remove, if there are knives and syringes and, huge holes, we need to make sure our children don't get harmed by those. But it's a matter of degrees, right? And one thing we're seeing is maybe the snowplow parenting is we're going to remove the things, even the smaller bumps. And what happens there is when children are robbed of those experiences, they don't get the chance to develop resilience, creativity, conflict resolution, right? So, snowplow parenting, and the age of authenticity, that's Taylor Swift, if any of you don't know. I'm assuming everyone knows. But I think I think that Taylor Swift is an interesting example of the age of authenticity, and that I like her music. But I think there are narratives that are about, I find myself by shaking off my haters and by proving who I am and finding myself. There's a sort of, it's about her journey, right? And so many people relate to that sort of narrative. So who are we talking about here? The young people. We're talking about the family. We're also talking about the young people. Generation Z, Gen Z is primarily who we're talking about. People born 1990s through 2010s. So if we're going to talk about what are some major themes of most Gen Z young people, the narrative they're receiving is the meaning of my life is the individual discovery of me, myself. These young people, a majority of them are highly distrustful of institutions. And if it makes you feel any better, it's not just the church, it's all of them. Low trust in church, low trust in schools, low trust in the president, low trust in Congress. This is the loneliest generation that we know about statistically, which kind of is logical, right? We'll get to that if you spend most of your time on your phone and you don't have a high investment in institutions, which usually is community. It makes sense that you're lonely. Engaged or addicted to technologies that create, I love this phrase, high connectivity but low connection. That's the outcome of social media engagement. High connectivity, low connection. And then again, you add, they went through one of the most formative periods of their life in lockdown, right? That's when the brain is, the plasticity of the brain, it's really important that they're making social connections, and they didn't get to learn that. We'll get more into this later, but a lot of this has led to mental health issues that higher risk of depression, anxiety, self-harm, and suicide for Generation Z. And we know the technologies, again, I'm going to get into this more, stunt social skills and the ability to converse and relate to other humans in person. So what we have, I think, a lot of the time are exhausted and overscheduled young people, and parents feeling pressured to provide endless chances for children to find their thing and prepare them for a competitive workforce. Those are some markers I've experienced of many Gen Z young people. One a really helpful way to frame this that Jonathan Haidt gives in his book Anxious Generation is this. Generation Z was overprotected in the real world and underprotected online. So you think about the changed expectations of parents of the ages at which young people are allowed to go outside, the age at which they're allowed to walk to school on their own. And there are these narratives where it's like, I don't want my kid to get kidnapped, I don't want my kid to get raped, I don't want something to get them to have to get hit by a car, right? Those are valid. But you think about the irony, and many of us didn't realize this was happening as it was happening, but it's like the likelihood of your child walking to school and getting abducted is much lower than when they get online for 6 hours, a pedophile or a groomer or a stalker or a bullier making contact with them online, right? And so there's this kind of imbalance of the ways we're overprotecting kids in the real world, in the learning they need in the physical world, all the while they're being preyed upon on social media, right? And I think we're just kind of starting to figure this out. So let's talk about the church. The church is outdated for us. So we have young people who are often anxiety-ridden, normally tired, overscheduled, and one of our primary go-tos is youth group, right? Which again was created for a different time period. And I find that often now seen as this is just another activity that can't compete in this identity formation, right? That I have to find who I am, and there's all these other options. It's a buffet, and so we look like all the others. Youth group is right next to soccer and dance and theater and everything else, and we can't compete, right? Either because of the social standing those things give them, or the scholarships they might give them. There's a lot of reasons, right? It's hard to compete. And it's also an institutional gathering for this generation that doesn't trust institutions very much and doesn't find meaning primarily by like, well, I'm part of the First United Methodist Church youth group, says no kid when they're bragging, right? It's not the thing that is important 60 years later, right? Okay, so we're going to pause. I want to give you maybe a minute, 1 to 2 minutes. I want you to internally, if you want to take notes or just think about it in your head. I just want to hear from you 2 categories. What am I naming that matches with your experience? One category. What have you seen? Or yes, I agree. And secondly, are there things that don't make sense? Are there things you'd want to add that I'm missing? Based on what you're seeing in your world. So take 60 seconds and think about what resonates, what's missing that you need to add. Okay. All right, so let's talk a little bit. Let's start with the matches or the resonating. What have I named that is tracking with what you're experiencing in your community?
And why don't we just share with you and then you can repeat it? So
Perfect. Yeah, why don't you shout them out now?
everything.
Everything. All right, we're on the right track.
Overprotected, they call them helicopter parents, snowplow parents, take your pick.
What is that overprotection? How have you seen that happening?
I was a high school principal.
High school. Oh, so you got all of it. Yeah, high school principal.
I think the trust is the biggest word that you use that reflects, there's no trust. So I was a school teacher as well. Grew up in the 60s and the 70s, so I relate to what you said about growing up then. My child was born in 1988. She doesn't trust any of the organizational things, government, church, and she grew up in the church. I took her to church every Sunday. Sunday school, youth group, all of that. With her children, they don't go. She doesn't trust any of that. The people in my neighborhood don't. When I grew up, like you said, the parents all raised everybody's kids. Mm-hmm. If I were to intervene in something that goes on with the kids in my neighborhood, I would probably have cops called on me. The parents would not allow that. It's, don't tell my kid what to do. If he's beating up on another kid in front of my house and I'd say, stop that, you can't do that, the parent would come back on me and say, you can't tell my kid to do that. Same way at school, right, Lorraine? Oh, absolutely. At school, the faculty cannot intervene in stuff like that because it's not allowed. You can be arrested, you can be charged. So there's no trust anymore in adults. They don't even trust each other.
Okay, friends, if we're gonna use the mic this way, then we have to give space to repeat back.
Yeah, that's okay. I might pass it around just if there. So the two things just for the recording, I heard you say you resonate with
Lack of trust.
lack of trust, both in terms of like you see your kids who, not trusting institutions, and also adults not trusting other adults in general. Thank you so much for that. So lack of trust.
So in response to that, I grew up on the north side of Des Moines. The north side of Des Moines. After dinner, we ran the streets. Our parents did not, nobody took care of us. They didn't know where we were. When the street lights came on, we went home. I mean, nobody even had any idea where we were. So it wasn't like the other parents were watching. Nobody was watching out for us. My daughter went nowhere by herself, ever. She never walked to school. I mean, so I resonate with that. Another thing about the, association, it isn't just us, of course, it's, all the other clubs and whatever too. But when you used to go to church, it was a status thing. You could get a better job. It was a status thing. It's no longer a status thing to go to church. It doesn't have to be the opposite. Yeah.
Yeah, it's taboo. Right. So.
Can we go back to
Yeah, we can go back to that. Yeah, absolutely. So the two things I heard you say, one was, in your childhood, you were given a lot more freedom versus even what you gave your children.
Absolutely.
And then two, you want to affirm the shift from valuing being associated with church to that not being valued socially in terms of social status. Thank you.
Just for clarification, I'm a former high school teacher, and I love teaching high school kids. But I was torn always by the number of activities that were in the high school. On one hand, I thought it kind of kept kids out of trouble because they were busy with things to do. But on the other hand, I thought it didn't give them time with their family, time, space. We went from volleyball to basketball to track to softball. Even before one sport was done, the other sport started. Sundays weren't sacred anymore. They were supposed to be, but all a coach would have to do is go to the school board and say, well, we've got a tournament coming up, we need to practice on Sunday. When we grew up, a lot of us, basketball practice quit, when we got out of school for Christmas break or Thanksgiving break. It didn't start till we came back to school, and that isn't the case anymore. Sometimes it's before school practice, after school practice. So I saw kids busy, and they weren't getting into trouble, those kids. They were getting good grades. They were in sports, building a resume. But I think that kind of took away from the churches a little bit. And what resonated with me a lot was that it's another activity for the family, which means if it's just considered an activity going to church or youth group, then there's no spiritual connection going on. And so then I wondered, is this what's given the rise to these praise bands and things like that, that it's more of an event than an activity. Like we went to an event last night, so, it becomes more of an event, so then we'll go to it than a spiritual connection. I don't know. You probably belong to a praise event, I'm sorry.
Because I'm under 40.
No,
I didn't take that personally. I don't belong to a praise band. But I do think that's an interesting comment to think, is the church, for better or worse, responding to seeing this happen by trying to make itself as attractional and entertaining as these other offerings?
Contemporary.
Yep, I think it's a great question.
I think there's also a turn in the culture where Christianity was the norm, and the overwhelming majority in the U.S. To where now that's not the case. And so in our school systems, why would they consider the faith practices of Christian students and their time frames to drive the schedules of all their students? I mean, that is,
You're right,
I'm the pastor pastor of a church, and I get that, but I would be concerned if my child were being reared in an environment where we were given precedent over our time and our holidays while other faith traditions were not.
Right. So I think an example of that is saying, you're probably here not gonna be like, oh, we're not having high school on Fridays because that's when Muslims go to prayer. Right? That's the same thing as, in a way, us expecting public schools to accommodate
Correct.
church.
Yes.
Yes.
You have. As far as the finding your thing, and I'm not saying I agree, disagree, I mean, very neutral on this, but you have kids that aren't for sure if they're boys, they're not for sure if they're girls, they're not for sure how they feel about things. And Christianity as a tradition, we are, I don't want to say open, but for lack of a better way to explain it right now, they're not feeling welcome. Like, why should I go to church if God doesn't like the fact that I don't know if I'm a boy or a girl? Or if God doesn't like the fact that I'm gay? They're having a misconception on some of them because a lot of congregations don't care. We just want you here. We're not going to judge you because you're gay. We're not going to judge you because your hair is blue. But they've got that misconception that they will be. So why even bother going?
Amen. But there are congregations that say the Bible says.
Hold on, use the mic, please.
But there are congregations in our community alone that say that we use the Bible says.
Thank you so much for that. And I wonder if we could maybe put that over in missing, because I didn't really cover that much. That's another important part of, I think, being empathetic to millennials and Gen Z is that there are some things that there are some reasons that young people are opting out of church that I feel like are not valid, right? That we're naming that I'm too busy or I don't. There's a sense of over-focus on like my own journey over the community. I think those are things that we're called to prophetically push against. But sometimes, some of the loss of participation has been young people prophetically resisting what the church has done, right? So it's like the racism that has existed in the church, the sexism that's existed in the church, the homophobia that's existed in the church. It makes sense that there's some valid reasons that's been uncovered publicly more in the last 30 years. Young people say, I don't want to be a part of these institutions that have these things. Whether that all or nothing response is healthy, we can talk about, but I appreciate that. That's part of something I think we can celebrate and appreciate in young people is like a willingness not to just continue to participate when they have problems with the way that institutions conduct themselves. Okay?
I just want to add a little more to that. So when I was talking about my own daughter, she lives in London, so she lives in this big city where it's very diverse, and she doesn't like church because of the way that church judges people, that you know, the gays, the transgender, the other religions, the Muslims, that she doesn't like organized church because of that. And you know, she believes in Christ and all of that. She just doesn't like the way the church operates or the congregations discriminate, I guess. That's why.
I want to keep moving. Is there anything else that's missing that's like, I'm seeing this happen in my neighborhood or church that wasn't named? Yes, please.
So there is this, I guess, narrative about youth and children and young families, priorities, about their ability to come to us, right? But there's this piece that I struggle with for the church and the members, no matter what generation, their unwillingness to invest in the lives of the children and their interests beyond Sunday morning and their youth group. So like, if we're really invested in the life of the children, do we know what their interests are? Are we willing to go to their volleyball game? Are we willing to attend their spring concert? And like, it's like, if it doesn't occur in our building, it's not a church event, and we're not, like, but they're expected to come here to do our things. And so I struggle with that.
Thank you so much. And that's your, again, like planting some seeds for kind of where we're headed. I think Christendom is a word that's coming to me. Like the idea of Christendom as the church and culture are synonymous. You know, we can just assume the majority, if not everybody, is Christian. We came from that, right? That's how I was even formed in seminaries, this sort of Christendom assumption. If they build it, we will come. And so I think the shift of church activities not being given priority, and then often our church's mindset that people should be coming to us are both remnants of Christendom, which we're no longer living in, right? We're no longer living in a time where everybody's Christian, or it's just assumed that I'm going to follow Jesus through your institution just because that's the title I was given when I was born, right? So there's been this shift. And there might be change that young people need to do, but that also means there might be change that the church needs to do in terms of our expectations, right? We've been going for about an hour. Would it be helpful to take a break, or do you want to keep pushing forward?
I can pee.
Okay. I only need to hear one of those to stop. But yeah.
I would say spiritual formation. The spiritual formation, I think, when I was growing up, was very much, the same, relegated to the church and to youth group. And, based on what is, going on, we really need to enable our parents to foster that spiritual formation at home. And so, I think that's the piece.
Formation at home.
Yeah. And enabling parents to do that.
So let's.
I was not in that church, because okay, yes.
And is there?
Yeah, I'm in that church because the spiritual formation is deeper than a VBS activity that you attend like one time. It's deeper than the pictures that we take when a kid gets baptized. It's so much more than the rearing of intentional faith community over a lifetime. And I think a lot of our stuff is programmed. And like you were talking about, that activity-based stuff, but the depth of discipleship that I see now, even in our adults, from having a lack of spiritual formation within our church, because it just wasn't a priority.
So let's take a 5-minute break. Once the pause, and then we're going to kind of build on this and say, where are we headed? What are possible responses? 5 minutes. We will start at this.
Does everybody know where the bathrooms are?
If you go out the doors to the right, it's 10:34. We'll start at 10:39. Okay.
Yeah, no, my little thing is start beeping, so you can make it yours.
Yeah, I was just like something.
Well, no, so my blood sugar is 780 G.
Okay, I use it.
Yeah. So this is the one that it's doing an auto correction for me.
Yep.
It really does function like a pancreas. I can eat an entire meal, not take it for and it'll I don't touch it. However, it does not do well. Any kind of exercise, so it made me crash earlier. I don't have highs anymore. This will go away in a few minutes. The goal of blood sugar is 400, and that works well unless I vacuum.
Right.
Or go for a walk.
It's too tight. If you actually move it. Yeah.
So I have to eat regularly. So I had to eat a diet and whatever to get it spiked.
Good time. Okay.
So I'll show you how it feels. And the blues are the corrections, and the pink is when the basal rate. But it gives me, and there's none because it crashed.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I feel it,
Yeah, I'm still doing the live because it stopped me and starting.
No, that's over. Yeah, absolutely.
Hi friends, we'll be back in just a few minutes.
I know of them and familiar with their resources. Through the Youth Academy, it's really great. We get to see like a cohort of all the little programs. So there's like once a year we get together like 100 other directors.
I was just curious because I did a lot of work with, I went to Mars Hill and I was an intern at Mars Hill.
In Michigan. Okay, yeah.
Rob Bell. Yeah, and we were partnered with Kara Powell and Sticky Babe. And I worked under Steve Review, who is now working with
Yeah, I'm generally familiar with it.
To get in touch with them.
But I love the whole network. This is definitely getting that fan.
I wondered because like when they were talking about like getting people out and connecting and realizing it's not just in the church we need to connect with kids, it's outside. I was thinking one of the things, one of the big principles was sticky take it out here was that we need to have mentorships with long-term faith with our youth, get them to support one another and support them with their activities. My talk to me. And that way they're seeing it outside of the church and they're supporting them with activities, and so they feel that time on it. So I was just curious if you
I have never heard about Sticky Babe, and y'all are like in a good way to that's one of the things I'm going to talk about. I know these stories and I see that are or at least something that teachers, that are going to have more creative.
I was just curious because I've done so much work with them.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. Yeah, I like this.
I met Kara and I worked under Steve Review. I'm very interested in ministry. In fact, I would have loved to have done something like you're doing because it's a good passion.
So my niece married Keith Monk, who is the cross-country coach down there.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Do you know who that is?
Like my site, but I don't think there's a side.
Well, yeah, cross-country coach.
No, I don't work with it every day. Yeah.
I was gonna tell you,
Yeah.
I just wondered if that was what gave rise to the contemporary services with the praise. I don't have any.
No, totally. And I was being a little facetious too. But I get
But I just wondered if that's what's created that impact on the younger people when they go to that.
So were you able to
We're just talking to some friends of ours that live in Aiken that used to go to this. They attend the one that
One man was sort of paper work.
attend the one of the young people, it's the contemporary.
Yep.
So there's 2 minutes. Is that why we want to go here? Because it's more of a
Yep. Yep.
or is it because the girls are more spiritual that way?
Right.
And so that begs the question, should we be offering a little bit of both? That that's second one, because even though we're just, catering to the same services we have, they're really good.
I'm saying,
Right. Pick it up a little bit, right? Well, I like. Yeah. Everybody else is adapting it.
The old Dutch masters,
Yep.
I taught a lot of the contemporary artists here, so I don't need to.
Yep. Well, I appreciate the impulse. Like, I like the finding a middle way, where it's like, I hear you not totally dismissing or just embracing it uncritically. So it's like, okay, there seems like attraction to this community. Are there legitimate spiritual needs under that are driving them there? We can give some credit there and say, okay, what is this touching that is legitimately helping contribute to their discipleship? But also, we don't want to just mimic attract culture just because it looks like it's boosting numbers. And it's not. It's like, what's the middle ground there?
Yeah.
But I appreciate
For a
that.
couple more years.
Right. And I think we can like swing the other way and kind of be like, well, numbers don't matter at all. It's like, well, are you just saying that so you don't have to change? You know, because like we do have to bear fruit. You know, like Jesus did talk about bearing fruit. So.
Because none of us would want to go back to our.
Right.
We're okay with that.
Yeah, right.
So hopefully, that's
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, that makes sense.
And maybe that would help the younger kids come, but I just wondered if it's because they see it as an activity, that's the activity they enjoy. And maybe they got bad memories in high school of that.
Yep. No, I think it's a great observation.
My daughter lives in Leawood, and so they're right on the Missouri border, and they go to Core.org, or not Core.org, Church of Rose. But she attends Leawood Elementary, and they go to the Jewish school there. Here, we don't have meat on Fridays during Lent because of the Catholic. So, why do we push those practices on church night as far as you can, even though it's restricted?
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. Thank you for describing again. All right, this is our 1 minute warning. We're going to get started soon. All right, y'all. Welcome back. As happens with me, we're just kind of just throwing the schedule out the window. But I think that's good because that means we're having a good conversation, right? And we're taking more time than me just lecturing for an hour and then being done. So we're going to just kind of keep rolling on this new context piece, and we'll see what happens. And when we finish that, what will happen next? So that was really all time we're sort of doing diagnosis, right? We're simply trying to name what is happening with youth and families. Sounds like we've had some real resonance to some of the things I named, and I appreciated also a couple of things that you added that also tracked with my experience. So we've tried to the best of our ability, name some of what's happening, major challenges and themes. And so I want to talk just for a couple minutes about not jumping first to like programmatic solutions, but just kind of talk about from the Youth Academy, what are some of the things we've seen that Christianity can offer in response, right? If a youth group and like what was an old response, I want to start with, well, what does Christianity have to offer to families and young people who are growing up in a pretty different time than 1950s, 60s, 70s? So I want to name 4 things that are really top of mind for me right now. One of them is community, deep belonging. We use the phrase deep belonging a lot in this way, in a time of deep loneliness. I continue to see that Gen Z, that they are experiencing this high connectivity but low connection, right? That they're technically connected all the time, and statistically they have more friends than any of us had in 1990, right? Technically, but also higher rates of depression, anxiety, and suicide. So that there's some mismatch there, right? Like these connections and relationships clearly aren't fruitful or beneficial, or at least you can't survive on digital friendships alone, right? So we see loneliness happening there. And my sense is that there is, I wonder if even the many activities that young people are involved in could be classified as high connectivity, low connection. I'm not knocking on activities. I greatly benefited from soccer and band. It doesn't have to be either or, all good or all bad. But those activities create a certain kind of connection and a certain depth of connection. But I believe Christian community offers something that is much deeper than most of those activities. And so you can know 50 people on your football team, but never have had a conversation with one of them about what's actually happening in your life, right? So there's this sense of like, even though we're connected digitally and through activities, that doesn't mean there's real community here, right? Or the kind of community that like Jesus followers can offer one another. So I think that young people are deeply hungering for community. Sabbath has become more and more and more central to my personal journey, but especially to our curriculum, working with young people.
I hope all my people just jumped out of their seats.
Yeah, there you go. Practices of restoration, and I'm sure you all know because you're church people, Sabbath is so much more than turning off your TV for 1 hour. It was really the central command that God gave the people when they came out of Egypt, that you're not going to create an economy and a society that is like Pharaoh's economy, where you are what you produce, right? And so Sabbath is really the central practice of Judaism, and then Christianity inheriting that, is a huge gift that I think our culture is deeply longing for and needing as a response to this like go, that we're all wrapped up in, right? So Sabbath practices. Image of God, Imago Dei, Genesis 1 and 2. We talked about the way that Gen Z has primarily been given this narrative that your identity is about finding me, right? Finding yourself. And again, I think in some ways that's a corrective to some things that institutions did wrong in the past. Because there are beautiful things about this that's like, part of that narrative is young people feel more comfortable claiming that they're LGBTQ. We're not working against that, right? But again, the pendulum can swing too far to the point where like everything in my life is about me. To at the cost of community, right? And it doesn't have to be an either or. So image of God theology is able to affirm the uniqueness of the person, but then also have that counterbalance, which is your life isn't ultimately about just fulfilling your dreams and your wishes. That there's actually a relief to saying, hey, guess what? You can't do everything. And you don't have infinite options. Because that's not the meaning of life. The meaning of life is to be loved and to be made in the image of God and participate in communities that are conducive with us becoming disciples of Jesus Christ. Like, you don't have to find your own story and create it, because that's a lot of work. You get to be part of God's story as someone who's made in the image of God. And that's actually a relief, I think, when young people can experience that. The fourth one, we like to use the language of holy struggle. So I think holy struggle is a church response to the overprotection, right? The children who have been reared in ways that they haven't been given opportunities to develop resilience. I don't know if you've noticed, but Jesus, he's pretty hard on people to follow him in some ways. Like, he asks a lot of them, right? And I've found that if we can present that in a way that's pastoral, young people really like that. Like, when they're used to being treated like 8-year-olds and they're 16, and then they get to a community where it's like, hey, we're going to set the bar high instead of low, and that's how you belong. I find a lot of them respond to that actually being refreshed. It creates anxiety, but it also creates energy, right? So it's not just struggle in general for the sake of struggle. Holy struggle means this is something God calls us into and is with us throughout, right? Howard Thurman, the writer, civil rights leader, etc. He said when we work with young people, we should put a crown on their heads that's big enough that they'll be striving to grow into it for the rest of their lives. What a beautiful picture of the gift we can give young people, that Jesus gave young people, right? That he said, come pick up your cross and follow me. And I think young people are hungering to hear that, right? So these are just 4 motifs. They're not programs, but they're motifs that say, I think these are things that Jesus and the church can offer young people based on what they've experienced growing up, right? We're going to dig more into that. But that's just a couple thoughts about what are themes that Christianity has to offer. And now I want to move a little bit more into the nuts and bolts of like what could some of this look like. And we've already been kind of chewing around the edges of this. Again, and this is me wondering, but I wonder if part of the shift we need is to move from this question: how do we get youth to attend traditional events and join the church? How do we get them to opt into pre-existing programs? 2, a whole different set of questions, like where are young people? What do they need? How is God already working in their lives? How can we be the church to youth and families in the world and in the community? Right? So if you imagine, I feel like the church of the 1960s, 70s was like a vacuum. Like our job is doing. What if the church now is like more like a leaf blower, right? Like missional. Like our job is sending and going out and finding. You read the book of Acts, nobody was coming into the church in the book of Acts. And the early disciples, they were trying to contract and they were like hiding in their rooms. And the Spirit just kept, right? The Spirit was like, the church isn't going to grow if you just wait for people to come. And I wonder if we're back to that full circle, back to that point where it's like, the Spirit was sending them out to do all kinds of crazy things, you know? And they were encountering people and experiencing Jesus Christ when they took risks in those encounters in the community, right? That's very different than the if you build it, they will come model of church. And we're not used to that. So I want to challenge us to shift postures here. There is a term called relational authority that I've found really helpful. I mentioned the Springtide Institute, similar to Pew Research. Again, kind of laser focused on teens and spirituality. And they put out an annual report a couple years ago, and none of the youth they interviewed used relational authority, right, in their interviews, but they kind of summarized it to, we've listened to all these teenagers throughout the United States, and relational authority is the words we use to describe or summarize a lot of what they need and what they resonate with. You know, if they were going to give instructions to people like us for what's going to build a relationship with young people, it's a relational authority. So this is based on a number of findings. So Gen Z, 82% said, I'll trust someone who takes the time to hear what I have to say. 79% said, I'll trust someone who shares things about their own life, right? Appropriate self-disclosure. 85% said they trust another person when that person takes action that responds to their needs. 81% said they trust someone who believes that they care about them. 84% said they trust someone who not only knows a lot, but also uses that knowledge to help that young person. And so Springtide broke relational authority into kind of 5 pieces, right? Good listening, healthy transparency, integrity, care, and expertise. So these are the Springtide Institute is suggesting these 5 dimensions help create lasting influence in the lives of young people, right? And I noticed that care is like probably the main theme throughout all of this statistics. That it doesn't matter how smart you are or what your title is or what church you're from. If I don't have a sense that you care about me without an agenda, I'm not going to trust you, right? So I think the challenging news, but ultimately the good news is this, that it's, I think there's a fear that it's like, oh, young people don't need the church anymore. They don't need religious wisdom. That's not really what we're finding. I think what the Springtide Institute is claiming is that young people are hungry for community and open to the wisdom of religious traditions, but they're only going to be receptive to us sharing that wisdom if they feel that we care for them, we listen to them, we see their gifts, and we can surrender our own agenda about what that has to look like. Right?
In
And personally, I think that goes not only to youth, like in college and high school, but that goes to our young families too. If we start listening to them and listen to their ideas that they want to do, that's a big part of it too.
Right, and like most things with good youth ministry, the things we're saying don't just apply to 16-year-olds. It's usually true with adults too, right? So I think that's a great point just about missional evangelism efforts in general. So I think what I want to do, I want to share a few stories with you of things and that's why I'm lucky enough to get to talk to people at a lot of churches and in communities. I want to share some stories that I think are examples like that actually are happening, that seem like they're living into Christians taking risks, Christians trying to develop relational authority, Christians being willing to say, we're going to move from you have to come to us to like we're going to meet you here, right? And discover community and connecting together. These are contextual, so I'm not saying you should leave, and here's the list of what you should do, right? But they're just examples of, I think, what the Spirit is doing. So some examples, but I do think you could experiment with these in your communities. One is some kind of listening campaigns. That could be just you as a lay leader or a clergy person, or you training, because I think this is a huge shift. I think church leaders need to be trained. Lay leaders need to be trained in how to be missional, and how to be good listeners, right? And how to be like the leaf blower instead of like the vacuum energy, right? So listening campaigns, that's meaning strategically going to people in the community or that are connected or even peripherally connected to your church and spending most of the time asking questions and letting them come to you. I want to give you two examples of that. One was, I was doing a workshop last year where somebody gave this example. He works, this guy runs the tech for the church, he sits in the back, he does the sound and stuff like that. As is fairly typical, I think there were two teenagers who helped with that, right? That's the way they're connected to church. So they show up sometimes to help with the sound. He says the service ends, and they're cleaning up some stuff, and the two teenagers are just talking to each other about how busy they are, right? I got this, I got that. And one of them says to the other one something like, I wish we could just have a time where we went to this coffee shop down the street and there wasn't any agenda. I wish we could just have a time that was scheduled that we could just hang out. And the adult was listening, right? And he said, tell me a little bit more about what would be helpful for you. What would you want that to look like? And he started, that started a conversation, and they ran with that, right? And so what they did, it wasn't over-programmed, but it was like teens in the church and a couple adults who were good with teens show up at this coffee shop one night a week. The church pays for everybody's food and drink, and you just hang out, right? That's it's a Sabbath, right? It wasn't programmed, it was relational. And that's kind of slowly and steadily growing. Will that turn into a Bible study? Will that turn into mission trips? I don't know. Does it have to? Yeah, not necessarily, right? But if you want to get somewhere else, it's certainly, I think it needed to start there. Right? That's an example of somebody who's trained to be listening and start with what the young person needs instead of being okay, I hear you're busy, but why don't you come to this thing that I already did, right? So it's centered on the young person's needs. Another one that I think is really cool is there's a church that was really struggling with young families. Young families were some of them were members of the church but almost never showed up, right? And so they did listening campaigns where they were hey, can we meet you at a restaurant? Can we come to your house at a time that's convenient and just hear about how you're doing, right? And hear about your life, and one of the questions they asked was when do you most experience God in your life, just in your day-to-day life? And a number of them said putting our children to bed is a really sacred time. That's really special for us. And they talked together about are there ways we can support you in living into that part of your ministry as parents, right? Just such a beautiful question. And so they came up with kind of making kits for them that had some it had a prayer for the church that the kid and the parent could do, and a couple other just activities that strengthen that time. The parents were already naming was important to them. And I have to believe that the parents felt more connected to the church through that. Did they start coming Sunday mornings? I don't know, maybe some of them will. But again, is that the point? Or is Jesus community something more than just Sunday morning? But do you get that shift where it's we go to them, we ask what's happening, and then we come alongside them to do ministry with them? Instead of being hey, when you get off both of your jobs and you're finishing graduate school and 3 kids are screaming, why aren't you at church Sunday morning? Right? Like, there has to be a shift, right? So those are just two,
Yeah, that is what I hear. We've got actually a lot of young families in our church. The generation that is elder or older, I hear a lot of conversations when I'm with them about they never come. They don't, it's not important to them. And you know, I am the demographic that they're talking about. And when I speak with our young families and I'm in their homes and I'm with their children and we're talking about our lives as kind of equals from the same generation, they're not telling me that the church is not important. They are telling me that they're overprogrammed, overscheduled, that they need rest. And I love the bedtime. It's my favorite time with my kids. So like my church will hear me all the time. Like I complain when I don't get to do bedtime with my kids. I agonize over getting out of meetings sometimes so I can be there, even if it's just for like the last couple minutes before my 3-year-old closes her eyes. Like it's super important. And so like I love that. And you know, if I'm hearing the complaints about like, I guess the cell phone use is just a great one. If I am in a group of people and all I'm hearing them do is complain about my generation and how we behave, the first thing I'm going to do is pull out my phone and start scrolling because I've checked out. Right? Like, I don't want to engage that. It's not helpful, it's not beneficial, I don't feel cared for, and it's highly likely I'm not going to return, right? Except this is my church, so I come anyways. But and I feel the same thing about how when they get here on Sunday, the first thing they're hearing is like, oh, it's been a really long time since we've seen you. You know, or that kind of rhetoric, then it also, like, is it even worth it for me to do that on Sunday mornings if I'm going to be met with critique and criticism? You know, but the spiritual formation piece, like entering in and alongside them, when I speak with them, that is something that they're very interested in, want to show up for. Yeah, and no, they're not all here on Sunday mornings, but they do want connection with the church and in their lives, and they're willing to engage when it's meaningful for them. So my question is, like, what's the in-between? What's meaningful for them that does not involve around programming? However, yes, we want people here on Sunday morning, and we want them to read their Bibles. But what I can tell you is, I got a whole lot of people that show up on Sunday morning that don't read their Bibles.
Yeah.
Like, so what are we doing?
That's really helpful, and I think I can really relate to, again, I think as I'm kind of going these conversations, trying to find some kind of middle way, right? Because on the one hand, like you're naming, I believe the church has to be more flexible and adaptive and let go of defining success as people show up at a certain time for certain programs, right? We gotta let go of that and be more missional, be more adaptive. At the same time, like I hear you saying, that doesn't mean spiritual formation isn't important. That doesn't mean that we completely accommodate the culture, right? Because I don't feel like the future of the church is we just show up at football games and then all those kids will be Christian, right? So it's like, we can't swing so far where we just think that going to them is going to be spiritual formation itself. So it's like, it's complicated because you're building a relationship partially to draw them into more meaningful formation, but also there has to be a little, I feel like, humility to understand that I'm not just doing this as a bait and switch to give you fun stuff.
It does, to the connection.
Yes. So I'm tracking with, like, there's got to be a middle way where we're more flexible while we still say we have something valuable to offer, right?
I had a thought when you said the comment, well, I haven't seen you in a while. And I know most people mean that in the best possible. I really miss you. I wish you'd come more often. But people my age and younger take that as, are you maybe thinking that is, are you trying to say something?
And if 20 people have said it to you,
So,
You know,
are you trying to say that I should be here, like, are you going to take it that way instead of, oh, she really misses me? There's, oh, what's that, what's your underlying context with that? What are you really trying to say? And it's gonna make me not want to come even more. Rather than some people might want to just pretend like they've been there this whole time. Don't even say a word, just be like, hey, how you doing today? Or, you know, you don't have to acknowledge the fact that you've missed them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I don't know, I kind of go back and forth with that because,
can you use the mic?
I kind of go back and forth with that because I have also felt in situations like that where I have been away, where it's like, did you even know I was gone? Did you even miss me?
It's that.
You know, and so I understand, you know, the self-esteem issues that make us be really defensive. But we have to, you know, find that middle way.
Yep.
I think I'm just listening and I'm like, I've had the experience too where I've had people who I didn't notice that they were gone for several weeks and they got mad at me for not noticing they had been back. And I've had the people who were like, well, everybody got on me that I was there and I felt very self-conscious. And so I've gotten both, and I think it goes back again to that listening thing. So instead of going to people and saying, oh, it's been so long since I've seen you, say, hey, how have you been? And then you're getting into the caring and listening to the person rather than, so I think that's the better approach, is to, when you do see somebody you haven't seen in a while, at any age, to go and say, hey, how have you been? Because you'd say that to somebody you saw even just last Sunday. And then it's not the judgment, and it's that caring and listening thing. So I think that is where we need to get our focus back on, is listening and caring for people. Because I noticed in my youth, when I was teaching confirmation, when I started listening to my students and caring about what was going on in their lives, sometimes I would lose my whole hour to just listening to the kids and what they were going through and what they wanted to share with me. And when we listen to them and then we take initiative and say, hey, you know what, that's a really great idea. I think we're going to try doing that. Like I did Jesus meetings on our schedule because our kids had it. So I think that listening thing and caring needs to be where we reframe.
And to add to that, don't ask them to do something right away either because they will come back. I just wanted to say one thing about the bedtime thing, and I really like that. I had a thought. It's like, I was a children's librarian. Why couldn't we send out kids with bedtime, religious bedtime books, maybe at Christmas or at Easter or whatever? Or I have a little free library in front of my house. Why can't we put a little free library in front of the church and put, you know, books for, this is more for the younger youth, or we could put, you know,
Have a small one that they
have a small one, big one, yeah, do something like that to reach out and make people, you know, they get that connection, they might connect people.
Sorry, that was awkward.
I'm going to offer a different perspective. I wonder if people, excuse me, my generation, do that, oh, we missed you, because we know that our aging parents would appreciate that, and we just kind of forget. They are wanting that, oh, you noticed I was gone. But the young people don't want the, you notice, and we get confused and we just do it.
Yeah.
So, the elderly do like to be noticed as missing.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think the kind of Christendom way to receive this is being like, oh, okay, this is the program that's going to work everywhere, that's one size fits all. So now let's just make all the kids and send them to families, and the families in your church might get to them and be like, why are they doing this? You know? Like it started with asking the question. And I'm giving an example of a response, right? So the key was going to them, showing you cared, and asking, how are you? How's God moving in your life? They might say something totally else. They might not want these kids, you know? It might be like, wow, like nobody comes to like my kids' recitals. Okay, that's the response for your context, right? So it's more about the listening than trying to lift the solution and apply it everywhere. That makes sense.
I said that because I made the statement, we don't have any kids in our church. We baptized like 3 or 4 babies in the last year, but those families just don't come back after the baby's baptized. But maybe it's because we don't reach out to them and ask them or give them something to say, the church cares about what you do. So that's why I got to go back, I guess.
Yeah, no, totally. And you're right, that doesn't mean that's a bad idea, it just means it comes out of the relationship, right? Okay, that's just one. We've got a big list here. Mentoring. Maybe we talked about this during the break. Some of you might be familiar with kind of the confirmation mentoring. Your churches, you match a 7th or 8th grader up with an adult in the church, and they have conversations. I mean, something I've been wondering is like, why did we stop doing that at the end of confirmation? I know that one church in particular made that one of their ministries to match high school students with an adult mentor. And so maybe that student isn't at church every Sunday morning, but if they get to pick and hang out with somebody they like, and maybe it's just like we get breakfast once a month, maybe coffee once a month. And again, it's just about listening, right? Just about listening. Some of those relationships can be really meaningful. One example I really like that I heard was there's a youth group at United Methodist Church. They have a Sunday school, and it's a clergy person and a couple adult volunteers run it every Sunday morning. And one of the volunteers, he's probably 35, 40 years old, he's a farmer, vocationally. And so some kind of a tradition that has developed is he kind of like every year kind of invites a student to almost like apprentice with him. That he, like 1 or 2 usually young men, that's like, hey, would you be willing to like help me out on the farm at these certain times? And it's like a vehicle for this mentorship. That it's like kind of become a legacy of the thing with like an honor. You know, when you get to high school, you get to like work with this person. So like again, it starts in a local church, but it's that relational. He's like, I notice you, come alongside me, let's do life together. Of course, we know about safe sanctuary, right? Of course, we have to set this up in ways that are mindful and honor like the boundaries, but there are ways to do that with public/private space.
So one of the things that my church, when I was called here, said that they wanted to do was to build a strong relationship and pastoral care within the community, our own church community, so within. And so we developed congregational care teams that nurtured our congregation from littles to young adults, to young families, to our people at home. And I have struggled with the team. Initially, a bunch of people said they wanted to be a part of it, and we were gathered to do it, and it became a lot of like administrative checklists and boxes, and well, I can't send out this many cards, I can only send out this many, and what do? Do I call them? Do I send the card? Do I have to go in person? Do they really meet in person every month? And then, for the little, well, they can't even read the cards, so why am I doing this? To then like having a conversation about like, why are we even having this ministry? 5 people want to drop out. And I'm struggling because the vision that you're talking about with mentorship and spiritual formation and walking alongside people is, I guess, what I'm trying to do, but the reception that I'm getting is not interested. And so trying to figure out then, how do I build this when that's the reception? And I'm struggling.
I wonder if there's any wisdom in the room, like anybody have ideas about seeing this work or thoughts, like as local church leaders that are responsible? I mean, I can offer a couple like wonderments, but I don't know if the room has any thoughts about it. Let's look.
Your concept of having people walk together, Celtic Christianity has an Ankara is the concept soul friends, and I think that would be a great thing for the church to lean into, that there is one person that is assigned. I remember I always used to listen to Garrison Keillor. I don't know if you guys did, but he always talked about, not always, but he had this story about having the blizzard parent or the blizzard home, that when there was a blizzard you were assigned a home, and he always kind of in his head would envision what that would look like and what that would feel like to have So, you know, just having the concept, I think, can ignite in people imagination of what a soul friend is. But I think, yeah, we do have to mentor them into what that looks like throughout, you know, a child's development. I know with, you know, confirmation, when I would teach, I would always ask the kids when they were done, you know, what was your favorite part of confirmation? And they would always say, the mentors, the mentor program. And part of that mentor program was creating a list of questions, both kind of fun ones and, you know, as well as some spiritual ones for them to talk about in regards to the service. And, you know, and always telling them, you know, stick to this if it feels appropriate. If it doesn't, you know, just, you know, have a good conversation. And that was their favorite part. And so I think going back to being a resource and mentoring our mentors, mentoring our parents, mentoring, you know, the people who want to care about our youth, and you know, giving them ideas, whether it's, you know, hey, meet with them and read them this book. You know, in the church library, you don't have to buy it, but just, you know, have an ice cream cone and say, hey, I want to read this book with you. Wouldn't that be cool? You know, what, like Garrison Keeler, what ignites in your imagination when you think of having a soul friend? What does that look like? And challenge people to have fun with it.
There are a couple of responses, yeah.
I was the Blizzard family because I was the school librarian, so all the Brit, we went with Brit, and the Brit parents would all sign me up as where their kids would go if there was a blizzard. And so, and I have so many adult friends now that I come to my house when they were children. Anyway, what I wanted to say was I had a thought about, we have an elderly person in our community, or our care center, and his wife is quite bitter because of the age and the things that they're going through, and he feels not very connected to the church other than Jenny goes down and does a service once a month and gives him communion. And I just thought, well, what about some of these kids that we just confirmed in the last few years? What if they could go to the nursing home and be a mentor to that elderly person, because they love seeing young people come down. It doesn't have to be little, it can be teenage kids. So what if we do something like that? That could be a mentoring program to get the teenage kids involved.
Well, first, it seems like it really helps if you can find one person who's truly passionate about congregational care, and they're just like on fire for it. And we've got a lady like that in our church. She just recently lost her husband, so this has given her even more time to be involved, and she's formed a pretty good-sized group of people. And then the second thing I've noticed over the years is that there's a lot more connection going on in our churches than we realize. Sometimes it just doesn't come under the cover of a formal program. There's a lot more neighboring and checking up on people that's going on privately that people don't want to necessarily share with everybody else.
Thank you for all that, Kristen. I don't know. I think it's a great question, and just to add to the questions, I think I'm wondering, how do I say this? Like, I wonder, on one hand, I wonder about like, almost like charisms, like, are there particular people, maybe it's a small amount, like, do we kind of have to find the people in the same way that it's like, you're an organ player, you're a piano player, you're the accountant, it's like, maybe there's small groups of people who have an aptitude for this that aren't, and maybe is it going to be a big group at first? You know, so part of it is like, are there people that's a spiritual gift of theirs? And or, I'm also curious about maybe the amount, maybe we're reckoning with the amount of spiritual formation that needs to happen.
The feedback that I've gotten is the number of people that need care on that list.
And is that like adults too?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Elders, young families, youth, children, babies, which kind of correlates with the young families.
Yeah.
So.
This is how I get out of dealing with your problems. Like, I only deal with 17 and 18-year-olds, so I have no idea. But no, I do think that like the breadth of that challenge is significant. You know, and I think the examples that I gave were more like this church found 3 people who were great with teens, matched them with the 3 teens, right? Or this farmer, it was one guy in the congregation who this is a gift at this, right? He was already bought into supporting the youth, and then we just deepened that for like the farming apprenticeship. So I do think that scaling is a hard thing with that, but it's like, I'm speaking particularly about like the 3 teens you have in your congregation, that might feel a little more attainable, or who are 2 or 3 adults who get it. Or even like letting the youth decide, who would I want to hang out with, right?
Yeah, I think a lot of it, like, I got trained in Stephen ministry a number of years ago. In Stephen ministry, either the pastor or somebody in the congregation is responsible for pairing up people for, they get told, a lot of us get told who needs a mentor, who needs a Stephen minister, and then the pastor or the coordinator of sorts would get to pick based on personality who would best fit for that. And sometimes in the mentorship, you've got ages from youth to older. Sometimes it helps to put 2 people who are both in need of mentorship together to mentor each other, because sometimes you get a lot of mentoring for yourself, mentoring somebody else. And sometimes as pastors, we're kind of one of the better people because we minister to these people to be able to see who might be paired well together, knowing their connectivity.
I love this topic. I wish we could spend another hour on it. I'm going to keep moving with a few more anecdotes. Another thing that I've seen that's been interesting in a couple spaces is just some kind of community groups with youth that aren't explicitly spiritual or religious, or maybe actively, like, or being very good at this church group, right? So there's a pastor in Sheraton, Iowa, who, I don't even know how he started this. I don't know if he just started because he was passionate about it, or maybe a student mentioned it, but Dungeons and Dragons. Yeah. So Pastor Gray started the Dungeons and Dragons group just for the church, just for the community, pretty much like unrelated to church activities, and it's kind of slowly been growing. And they even added to it, I think recently, like a dinner afterwards that families can come eat. So it's like there's high school students there. There's families now there, and I was talking to him. I had a meeting with him a couple weeks ago, and I was like, "How's the Dungeons and Dragons group going?" And he was like, "It's really good. A lot of the students don't want to talk about religion, or are really suspicious of church, and like, so I honor that." But he's like, there's one kid who literally just started showing up on Sunday mornings. Like, he came to this group for a year, and we didn't even invite him, and he just started showing up at church, and his family didn't come. I was like, that's really amazing, right? Like, again. Not that it was like a bait and switch where it's like, finally we captured them, but like, it started with the relational authority. I'm a normal person, I'm going to meet you where you're at, and eventually young people are like, I like this person. I like their energy. This is a safe person. I want to be around them. I want to discover what they have, right? And so, I think that speaks to how we have to earn it, and the patience, and going out and meeting them with that. Because that young person never, ever would have walked into that Sunday morning service without 2 years of Dungeons and Dragons, right? But I just love that example.
Well, and just to speak on that the measure of success is 1 student.
Yep. And are you simply making an observation? Are you saying it's underwhelming, or?
No, I'm saying that a lot of times in the church we look for, we're calling a young pastor, and so when she opens her backpack, 50 million young families are going to pop out and come on Sunday morning, and it's like, the measure of success is not one person's devotion to Christ.
Yep, right.
But in this, it's, that's a win because that one kid started coming. Yep. And it meant something to them. So it's kind of like that starfish example. Right? Like, I can grow a million out into the sea, but if that one makes it, then great. Like, that's enough. And I think that's what you're talking about with that Sabbath piece, is that a lot of times our churches and our people are overwhelmed with the task at hand because the measure of success is way out there.
Yep.
And so it's not even attainable, and it feels like Pharaoh.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really helpful. I mean, just to add a couple things. The measure of success, I would say, is partially that student who came into like deeper Christian community formation, but also like, can we train our churches to see there is Christian formation happening in the Dungeons and Dragons space when the adults from the community are respecting these young people, modeling healthy relationships, giving them a place to be when they could be doing who knows what, right? That is an expression of missional Christianity, whether they ever come to worship or not. And that's a shift in mindset. And I think there's legitimate questions about, like, how are we going to keep this building open? How are we going to, you know?
I was the interim pastor at that church before.
Really? Okay. That's so
During
cool.
COVID.
I love that. I didn't know that. So the community group is also, it's that middle way, right? We want them to experience equal formation, but that doesn't mean the Dungeons and Dragons group isn't part of their, like, the discipleship too. And I think this is part of, like, us accepting the end of Christendom. It's like, you know, the early church, they were little scrappy communities without a lot of resources and without a lot of cultural power. And they were different, you know, and they looked more like this than a church, honestly, with like 20,000 people. Like, it's different. It's mustard seed ministry, like a lot of Jesus' parables. Some other stories. Another thing that's been interesting that I've seen a few churches doing is categorizing work with youth closer to how they think about other things, like, we're committed to anti-hunger stuff. We're committed to refugee resettlement. Putting youth stuff almost in that same category where it's like a missional thing. And so instead of being like, why aren't there any kids in the youth room on Wednesday nights? Moving to saying, we're going to start going to their stuff. So we're going to ask them what's most important to them. We're going to ask their parents what's important to them. And then we're going to have sign-ups in the same way that you go downtown and serve at the shelter. We need sign-ups for adults to show up at this baseball game. We need adults to sign up at this for this theater performance. And again, that's not, I don't want that to be the end of the discipleship, but I would rather have a group of adults show up at a sports game, and that's the first contact that we never, versus we never see this family again, right? It's a connection point, and it communicates we care about you.
Even if you already, like the kids you already have. So I have a dozen kids, and they know I will be at least one of their events, whatever they got going on. Just because those are, but they're more apt to come back on Sunday. I don't have a huge group, but they're going to tell me what's going on. They're going to tell me about their lives. And maybe we'll spend the entire Sunday school time talking about what everybody's going on, and we didn't learn about Noah that week. But that's okay, because then the next week, they're going to come back again. And they're going to be like, hey, weren't we going to talk about Noah last week? Yes, we were. Let's do it this week. But then, you know, but be there. Even if it's one game, it's one person from the church there saying, hey, you matter.
And I think this is probably, if you're pastoring churches, this is probably a slow cultural shift that we have to be intentional about. Because I'm guessing there will be, I experienced that there are a lot of churches that with their mouths say they want more youth, but then when you start telling them what it's going to take, oh, well, nobody signed up to go to anything.
You said it.
Right? So I just want to name that this is a difficult task, and it's a task of part of it is pastoring our churches out of the Christian mindset and asking if they're willing to do that, right? A couple other examples. I'm connected to the Episcopal Diocese of Iowa, and they started offering free co-pays for therapy. I had a young person that very randomly got connected to the Youth Academy, which I consider sort of a youth congregation. Got to know him. Working class family, had experienced a lot of trauma. He was like, I can't afford therapy. I was like, guess what? We're going to pay for this for you. And it's been really awesome to see him like go to therapy for a year and get some tools. So are there just very practical ways? You know, we can show, hey, we know mental health is an issue. We're going to step up and try to make this easier for you. Sabbath practices and prayer practices. This is, I think this could fit a little bit more into the traditional programming, but just naming, if you do have youth groups, if you do have Sunday school, if you do have spaces where you actually have youth, how do we push ourselves for them to feel qualitatively different than like, this feels, you don't want it to be like, this feels just like how it feels sitting in math class, or this feels just like football practice. How do we qualitatively shift it so it's like, we're honoring your exhaustion, we're honoring your need for groundedness and tools to find some sanity in this world that's moving way too fast, right? And there are a lot of ways we can do that.
Yeah, it just reminds me of a conversation that we had at our worship meeting the other day where we did this kids worship. It was all centered for kids, but I used the prayer that was on like the UMC website for the blessing, and it was beautifully written. And we were standing out there, it was so long, and it was clearly written for the ear of adults, not for children.
Yeah.
It was really hard. I mean, the kids started messing around, they're looking away, they're starting to like play with the altar, and we're all looking at our papers, still reading, and it was, and likewise, I'm also working on a series in the church right now, and all of the resources for the children's time are, how do I say, it has this thing that it wants me to read to the congregation before I do the children's sermon that says, we're all children, and this is for the young at heart, too. And it's like, well, okay, can we have something that is for kids that is really just for kids? Does it have to be for the young at heart, too? Like, can it just be theirs? And can that be okay? So like, I feel like we have to apologize when we're saying it's for our kids and we're trying to, I mean, I can't tell you how many children's sermons I hear where I'm like, they're not talking to a kid. My kid, like, she's 3 and she can't. So, I mean, I use my kid as the marker, right? And it's great because I'm in close relationships so I can understand like where that mind space is. And yet, it's okay that it doesn't have deep theological questions, it's beyond their development, but like if they walk away knowing God loves them, that's enough.
Yeah, thank you. Just 2 other thoughts about things we can do. That holy struggle piece, I think, is important too. That the way that Jesus invited young people into hard things, and that we can invite young people into hard things too. Again, that's not hard as in like, I know they hate youth group, God, I'm going to try to force them to come. That's not the hard thing exactly. It's more like as we build relational authority, right? As mentors make these one-on-one connections or personal connections, as we gain trust with them, and we need to develop a habit of noticing their gifts, and then being like, what would push them, right? What would push them into holy struggle? Whether it's writing something for a service, or maybe they're cooking, so hey, would you help cook for this thing, right? Are there ways we can just create pathways that meet them at their growing edge, and we honor them by like that crown, right? Growing into that big crown. Because I think they're often they're often underestimated, and I think they'll respond well if we invite them into holy struggle based on things we know they care about, not things that we think they should care about, right? And the other thing is that we don't have to do this alone, right? That I want to encourage us to utilize connectionalism. I know there's a great group of churches in Cedar Rapids area that have developed, like they call it a youth co-op, and it's 3 or 4 youth groups that's very intentionally planned that meet together. Like I think 2 weeks a month, two weeks per month they do things in their own churches, but then the other 2 weeks they get together to do larger service projects, trips, etc. I'll talk in a minute about SYA, but there are also kind of these college or conference level resources that honestly I think you all have so much to do in the local church. You're doing ministry from cradle to grave, and you don't get to do it the whole time, right? So researching about teens and serving teens, and there are people who fortunately do get to do that. And so one person, Paul says one person plants the seed, another person waters, another person tends, right? And so also I want to encourage you to think systemically about this. So as I've kind of been building this project, something that Jesus says comes to mind. He says that those who love their lives will lose them. Those who lose their lives for my sake and the sake of the gospel will find them. And I wonder if we take that and try to sort of interpret it onto youth ministry, it would be something like this. If the church loves itself, it's going to die. If the church loves how it used to be, it's going to die. But if the church lets go of its old self, its ideas about itself, and gives itself to the youth themselves, right, instead of ideas about what they should be doing, I wonder if there are ways we could find ourselves that would look like resurrection for us, right? Okay. I wonder, do we want to take just a couple minutes break? Or do you want to keep going? How are we doing? Keep going. We don't have much time left. I just want to make sure we're okay. So I want to give you 3 reflection questions. And I want you can maybe start with the one that seems most important to you, and if you want to move on to the others, you can. But I want you to take a couple minutes to think. A little bit about what I'm learning about like lean startups, meaning like trying new things and adapting and creating new responses, is you don't want to start with something that's you don't want to start something that's really expensive or is going to cost a bunch of time and energy, right? You want to start with things that are going to be effective but are efficient, right? That you don't have to build a whole new thing. You're just kind of experimenting. So I just put a few questions up here that would let you think through that. So one of them is like, what's one easy way that my church could build any of these elements for you into our existing program here, right? Basically that means if you already have a Wednesday night gathering and a Sunday morning church, I'm not asking you to plan a whole separate youth service on Friday nights, right? I'm saying with what you already have, are there small ways that you can make a shift to create opportunities for teenagers? The second question is a little bit different. What's one new low-risk, low-resource experiment my church could do to introduce a new practice, a new gathering, something that in the church life that incorporates the elements that we've been talking about? A third question is, what is one way I could train my congregants to move from this programming mindset to this like developing relational authority with youth mindset? So I'm going to give you a couple minutes just to think about it silently, and then we'll talk about it. Do these questions make sense? Okay, so just reflect a little bit. Sounds like everyone's already doing this, but you're welcome to share with each other what you're thinking.
I always have a partial before. I don't know if he's still at Simpson or not, but Brandon Strong with basketball.
Okay.
I don't cross paths with him.
No.
I have left and gone somewhere else. I don't know.
Might have.
So is this a book you'd recommend? It looks like a good book.
Yeah, so that's just
I don't understand. He just got me on which one.
of all of them. Okay.
Which one have you used?
So the one that I've been, it depends on what your goals are. So the one about mental health is the most helpful for you to share. That one, it's a news game. It's news. So I really like that one for mental health. The springtime. Anybody have a wall for an iPhone? All right, take maybe 60 seconds to wrap up this conversation.
That's an HDMI port. Yes. I just need the.
All right, friends. Come back to the big group here. I wonder if we could just have like 2 to 3. Anybody's going to share something that's coming out of this that they can put in their conversation. Answer any of these questions. Thoughts, ideas.
Something I've been playing with, and we're gonna try to do it, we're gonna try having a messy church. Which is, it's a night where your family's been invited, you do a craft, you have some food, you do a devotion.
Not this, we like to.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we're gonna try that, that.
I love that. My little school church in Des Moines that I'm part of started piloting. We've been adapting, but we just did one last night. Wednesday night, we're calling it Pray, Think, Act. And it's it's an efficiency thing, right? Where it's like, we don't have the money or the power to do. Somebody runs a Bible study, one event, somebody runs a meal, another event, somebody runs kids. So, it's like, let's make this compact. So it's like Wednesday night, show up for 30 minutes, you do like a 20, 30-minute liturgy that is genuinely kid-friendly. It's wild. It's great. And it's a potluck, everybody brings a meal, and you get your meal and you have breakouts. The options are confirmation class, Lectio Divina, Bible study, or like teens having conversation about something, right? So it's just that it's like how do we be compact and adaptive to the needs of a bunch of age groups? Yeah. What other ideas were looking for him?
Really, a whole bunch of things. But we're talking about maybe getting them involved with like our Bible study, some of the elderly with Bible study, taking their God-given talents and offering a class to youth. Maybe we've got a lady that was a flower, she wrote flower patch, and let's put flowers together, or maybe a lady that's really good baker, we can do like a cookie baking
talking, I've got a 3-year-old, and it's been hard because my husband isn't able to be there on Sundays, and we're talking about what are ways we can maybe get some of the youth in our church who are disconnected or have issues with church, to say, hey, could you come? We'll give you a little something, and could you watch some of the kids in our church so that we can get them involved in the community, younger parents too, not only my child, but to have something available that does, you know, 2 birds, 1 stone kind of thing.
Got a little rabbit hole. We're almost done. I do think, again, this is a challenge because a lot of churches don't have extra money, but I think monetization is like a very valid thing to think about. Because when I'm like, okay, and we do this with SYA, it's like, if this college student, this high school student, if they're going to be working anyways, they could either be working at DQ or Starbucks, or they could be working here. And so, is there a way we can meet one of their needs by, we'll pay you, and create some kind of, we'll pay you, so they get money, which is need of theirs. You create something that in some way kind of creates a narrative of leadership or a position where it's like, oh, they get an opportunity to lead. And then it also keeps them connected to the church, right? So are there ways that we can, again, be efficient about that and do right by them and keep them connected? I think that's a great question.
I was thinking about getting some magnets for families to hang their kids' artwork or, you know, great work on their refrigerators, and taking that along, and just, especially to families who haven't, who are part of a vacation Bible school, who maybe are even part of another congregation, we don't know, but just to let them know that we care, that we're there for support, and invite them to have a conversation if there's any way that we can be helpful to them. So.
I like the idea about the listening sessions, and I think that's where I plan to start those conversations. We currently have like family fun and fellowship events where we invite intergenerational participation and an event, and it could be at a park, or it could be at a ball game, or we've changed those things. And some are well attended, some are not, and there's a variety of ages that show up. But we haven't asked the question. Like, we've just started doing that as a ministry to try and encourage intergenerational fellowship. We haven't asked the question for the young adults and young families, like, what do you want? What do you need?
It's like the most obvious question, but in some ways the one that we aren't taught to ask at all, you know? Because like, I just find myself in so many rooms where adults are like, we have to use this huge whiteboard to theorize about what they want and what they need and what's going on. It's like, well, they're the experts on what they need and want, right? So how can we form our congregations to just ask the question? I think it's a little bit counterintuitive, but thank you so much. Well, let's do one more.
I read about a lady a grandma like me, and she would just be at a certain place at a certain time and sit there, and kids would come one at a time and just talk and have a relationship. I don't know how to get it really started, but I thought it was a great thing, a listening time.
Yeah. It's almost like open office hours, but you wouldn't have to call it that, right? But just space to be, you know? Space to be that's open. I love that.
I have an idea for her. The public library, a lot of the kids, the public library, a lot of the latchkey kids that don't have parents that are at home after school or whatever, they gather out there. Sometimes if you just go sit up there, one of them will need help on the computer, or they need help struggling with the book, maybe somebody it's not up the word, or play a game with them or something like that. That's a great place to start.
Eric, I have a question.
I also wonder though, like, about this generation that's really weary of institutions and not sure that all adults are safe, and the parents are like, I don't want to talk to a stranger. Like, the creeper factor of like, oh, these adults are just gonna show up and have games to like play with my, like, that part of me is like, oh, that's great, and the other part of me is like, that's a little weird. Like, I'm not sure how to bridge that.
Yeah. I so appreciate that question. And I do think it's I don't think that's an imagined thing. Like, I do think because, like we talked about, because of the narratives, like, I do think parents' apples are up pretty easily. And One is I think that's why, even though it's adapted, it still needs to be very intentionally planned out, communicated, and run through the leadership of the church, right? It's not just like, okay, everybody leave and just surprise the kids this week, not that, right? So I do think that it's how do we frame this in ways that it's intentional? How do we communicate preemptively? And I think with Safe Sanctuary, how do we do things in groups, right? It's I agree that it's better to have 2 or 3 couples go to see a theater than just one random person, right? Show up for a student or something. So I do think those logistics are important. And I also find it in that middle way where it's we're being adaptive, we're getting out there, but I still find that the local church does have some important credibility guardrails there. Because it's I am really relational when I recruit for SYA, but the reason they give me access to their lives is because their pastor was I can vouch for this person. I know this program, you should meet with them. And then I CC the pastor in every single communication. Right? So it's how do we try to stay as above as possible and utilize the whatever standing we still have as an institution. I still think there's some value a church saying we're doing this versus just a random adult. That makes a difference still, right? So I think it's just a good question to remind us to be very intentional. Were you going to say something?
No, I'm just going to ask about Safe Sanctuary. Since everybody.
Yeah. So Safe Sanctuary, I don't know denominationally if it differs a little bit, but Safe Sanctuary refers to policies related to best practices of working with minors. So at SYA, that looks like things like an adult will never meet with a minor in a private place that is out of visibility. An adult will never communicate with a minor, over text or email without associating, including a parent. Just some of those basic practices that are guardrails against abuse or accusations, right? So those are really important. Okay, very last thing, as we're wrapping up. A little bit of background. We work at Simpson College. I work at Simpson College with my colleague. And every year we see college first years come in. And still a fair amount of them grew up in church. Less and less, but some of them. And I'm sure you know that just because a young person who's 20 went through confirmation, and went through mission trips, and went to Sunday school every week of their life, that doesn't mean that they consider themselves Christian. Or it doesn't mean that when they get out on their own, they're going to seek out a local church or a campus ministry or proactively work on their discipleship as a young adult, right? And so what that means for me is we see so many young people falling through the cracks at this critical window from 10th, 11th grade through the first year of college or young adulthood. And there used to be some proactive ways that denominations were responding to that, right? In the Iowa Annual Conference, for example, there used to be statewide youth events. Some of you might have even gone to as chaperones or as children. There used to be full-time staff who it's your job is to minister to students in high school and make that transition. As this has lost priority or money or both, there's less and less of that, right? And so that contributes that we don't have this capacity anymore in local churches and on denominational levels really to solidly build a bridge for young people between middle and high school and first year of college. And I tell denominational people this all the time. It's you can make as many discipleship pathways as you want on paper, but if we already lost them before they're 21, it doesn't matter, right? Many of them aren't even getting to the beginning of the discipleship pathway. So we need to rebuild this part of the path because they're falling off the edges, right? So we created this program 8 years ago called the Simpson Youth Academy as a response to that. To say we want to come alongside local churches, many of whom are low resource, many of them who are doing cradle to grave ministry and don't have the capacity to it takes a ton of work to figure this stuff out, right? Many of whom have youth groups with 1 teen or 2 teens or 4 teens. So we want to come alongside local churches and provide a supplemental community that can help with this discipleship to get these young people to the beginning of adulthood as Christians, right? So the Youth Academy is that. It's a way that we can come alongside your local churches and even if you planted the seeds and we'll do some watering, right? And do some tending. So the way that the Youth Academy works is this. Our mission is, you've probably got a sense, everything I've said the last 3 hours came out of the Youth Academy, right? Things we're learning, our values, you get a sense of what we're about. So the Youth Academy, the program that honors teens as contributors who have gifts and power and ideas that we need right now, right? Setting the bar high. We try to do 4 things. The most foundational thing is rear them as disciples by creating a safe place for them to explore questions about faith, and especially how faith is related to social justice, right? This is a community where they make connections of, oh, my faith actually matters in relation to school shootings, and mental health issues, and climate change, and hunger, and LGBTQ issues, right? That the church is a resource for me to do something about those things that I care about. So that's the first thing. Second thing is helping them get a taste of college. So kind of dip their toe in the water on that campus environment. Third is to provide a loving and inclusive, non-toxic community of peers for them. And fourth is vocational discernment, exploring what do I want to do with my life and my gifts. So I usually tell parents and students, if you're working on any of those things, this would be a great resource for you. The way that it works, a couple other aspects. This is not a Simpson feeder program. You don't have to go to Simpson afterward. This is not a pre-ministry program for students interested in becoming pastors, much broader than that. And this is an LGBTQIA supported ministry. So those are a couple things you need to know. The way it works, and why I'm telling you, is because it starts with you in these critical relationships. So over the next 3 months, we're in recruitment, and we invite folks like yourselves to nominate high school students. That's the relational authority piece. It's like, I see you, I'm noticing your gifts, I found out about something that could help you nurture those gifts. I would like to nominate you for this program, right? It's an honoring and a naming thing. You nominate students. We bring usually around 25 high schoolers to live on our campus in June for 10 days. They learn prayer practices and mental health care practices. We do immersion trips to nonprofits to see what Christians are doing in response to different community issues. We sit in on classes, Love God with Your Mind, right? So how you study Scripture and interpret it responsibly. Why people are using Scripture to harm people, and whether we can reclaim it so it can be liberated for people. How we can not be embarrassed about being Christian, but instead use it in ways that we're proud of, right? There are small groups, and every night they're supported in planning and leading worship. It's their space, right? It's like, what do you want this to be? And the goal is to incubate them and then propel them back into the local church, right? So they can apply for grants through SYA. There are structures we have for them to take leadership in youth group or local church settings. We just had a student who preached a freaking amazing sermon a couple weeks ago out of kind of her experience in the summer. So there are ways that it propels them right into local church leadership. It's really grown into more like a congregation that's alongside the local church. So we've built, now we have monthly gatherings. There's virtual gatherings, there's some retreats, not to compete with the local church, but just to, when you go back to churches with no other people their age, it helps to stay connected to a larger cohort of peers. So, I wanted to let you know about this because that's part of the connectionalism piece, is you don't have to do this all on your own. And we have, honestly, it's lightning in a bottle. We've done it for 8 years, we've changed it a lot, and it's working really well. And so I would love nothing more than you having students who are kind of at the edge of their learning to get connected to SYA, to grow deeper, and then come back and be able to feed that energy back into your local churches. So I've given y'all brochures. I have your emails, so I will be following up with you just to explore. And even if you don't have a student who's in 10th, 11th, or 12th grade right now, we're rebuilding an ecosystem, y'all. I'm in it for the long haul. And so if you don't have somebody this year, that doesn't mean I don't want to be in contact with you, right? Because we're going to have to rebuild this from the ground up, and we're going to have to notice students particularly and say, hey, I see you, I want to keep you involved in the church, and here's a way to do it, right? And so this is deeply relational work, and it's long-term work. So we're looking for current sophomores, juniors, and seniors this fall. If you have any students in your family or church or community, I'd love to talk to you about that. Any questions about SYA, is the acronym for Simpson Youth Academy? Yeah.
Do you have one for adults?
I
Because those classes, I'm like,
know,
I
right?
want to take that class.
I do that a lot. I know. And again, you heard some of my story. I'm trying to create something I wish I had, and I get to participate. But any other initial SYA questions?
So,
Yeah.
can they apply themselves? The
Okay.
student apply themselves, or do they have to be nominated? Because I see kind of both those terms.
Yeah, I would highly recommend we start with the nomination because it sets up a relational process where I meet with the family, I answer questions. I would be pretty shocked if a student proactively just send an application at that point. That's not how they work at this point.
Me too.
So I would say it starts with us,
Okay.
working together. But any other questions? Yeah.
Awesome. So, thank you so much. And I hope that you will be responsive to the communications that he puts out. When we're finished, I do want to let you all know you can fellowship and talk. However, the circuit meeting is still going to continue. So we're going to ask for the folks that are staying for circuit to remain here. The church is providing lunch because our meeting is going to continue into the afternoon. So if you all want to fellowship and talk, then I invite you to go meet our administrative assistant in the front of our church. Her name's Lori. She's lovely. And that's a space that's got chairs, an open space that you can sit and congregate and have a conversation while we continue our meeting.
Thank you all so much for your time. As a millennial who works with Gen Z, I'm wondering if I could try to take a picture of all of us to put on our platform. So I'm going to try it. I'm terrible at selfies with groups, so I'm going to try it, okay? So if we could well, let's do that. Well,
Would a selfie seem more relevant?
it's
True
it's
selfie,
kind of
someone
cool,
else gets.
yeah.
And we have tiers.
Okay,
So
so let's kind of,
Not to use your phone though, because mine's.
okay, I can use my phone. If you could
I
gather,
guess we can stop.
On the
maybe,
chairs?
yeah, maybe out in the front 2 rows.
Bye, thanks for watching.